Hi, my name is Marissa Cole, and a few months ago I learned that sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who can cut you the deepest. Imagine walking into the house you've spent years quietly saving, only to be told you have 48 hours to get out. No questions, no chance to explain, just a cold verdict from the very people you've sacrificed everything for. That night, my father's voice still echoes in my head. If you can't respect this house, you don't belong in it. But here's the truth they didn't know. The only reason that house still had a roof over it was because of me. It was early December in our small mountain town in Colorado, the kind of night when the air stings your face and the snow crunches under your boots. I just finished a double shift at the diner, smelling faintly of coffee and fried onions, and all I could think about was slipping into my old flannel pajamas and heating up leftover chili. When I reached the driveway, I noticed the porch light was on, bright, almost glaring. My father, Thomas, stood in the doorway, arms crossed, the light casting deep shadows across his face. He didn't greet me. He didn't even nod. He just stared. Inside, the warmth of the house didn't feel comforting like it used to. The scent of cinnamon, my mother's favorite candle, mixed with something sharper, tension. My mother, Linda, was in the living room, her posture stiff, one hand resting on the arm of the couch, the other clutching a tissue she hadn't used. "Marissa," she said, her voice clipped, "my ruby necklace is missing." I blinked, confused. "Your what?" "The one your father gave me for our 25th anniversary," she clarified, as if I didn't know exactly which piece she meant. It was the most expensive thing in the house. I shook my head slowly. "I haven't seen it." Thomas stepped forward, his boots heavy against the hardwood floor. "You were the only one home today," he said. His tone wasn't curious. It was accusatory. Something in my chest tightened. "Are you saying I took it?" Linda's eyes narrowed. "I'm saying I can't think of any other explanation." She folded her arms, and for a moment I was 10 years old again, standing in the same living room after breaking a vase, waiting for my punishment. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling in spite of me, "I didn't touch your necklace. I wouldn't—" "You have 48 hours to pack your things," she interrupted, like she was confirming a dinner reservation. My mouth went dry. "You're kicking me out?" Thomas's voice was flat, final. "If you can't respect this house, you don't belong in it." The words hit harder than any slap. My knees felt weak. This wasn't just about a necklace. This was a verdict on who they thought I was. The ruby necklace. I had admired it for years. I remembered the night Dad gave it to her. Christmas Eve, the whole family gathered, Linda's face glowing under the twinkling lights as she opened the velvet box. She'd worn it to weddings, to church on Easter, and on the rare fancy date nights she and Dad still took. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a symbol of their story. And now it was the weapon they were using to push me out of mine. I looked at both of them, hoping for some crack in their expressions, some sign they were bluffing, that they wanted me to protest so they could relent. But there was nothing. Just cold certainty. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but my throat closed up. I'd been here before, in smaller ways, when they'd accused me of being lazy, unmotivated, ungrateful. I'd learned that my words never carried as far as their assumptions. So I went upstairs. My childhood bedroom looked exactly the same as it had 10 years ago. The faded quilt my grandmother made, the corkboard still pinned with old concert tickets and Polaroids, the bookshelf lined with dog-eared paperbacks. This room had always been my refuge, the one place I could breathe when the rest of the world felt too sharp. I looked at both of them, hoping for some crack in their expressions, some sign they were bluffing, that they wanted me to protest so they could relent. But there was nothing. Just cold certainty. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but my throat closed up. I'd been here before, in smaller ways, when they'd accused me of being lazy, unmotivated, ungrateful. I'd learned that my words never carried as far as their assumptions, so I went upstairs. My childhood bedroom looked exactly the same as it had 10 years ago. The faded quilt my grandmother made, the corkboard still pinned with old concert tickets and Polaroids, the bookshelf lined with dog-eared paperbacks. This room had always been my refuge, the one place I could breathe when the rest of the world felt too sharp. I looked at both of them, hoping for some crack in their expressions, some sign they were bluffing, that they wanted me to protest so they could relent. But there was nothing, just cold certainty. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but my throat closed up. I'd been here before, in smaller ways, when they'd accused me of being lazy, unmotivated, ungrateful. I'd learned that my words never carried as far as their assumptions, so I went upstairs. My childhood bedroom looked exactly the same as it had 10 years ago. The faded quilt my grandmother made, the corkboard still pinned with old concert tickets and Polaroids, the bookshelf lined with dog-eared paperbacks. This room had always been my refuge, the one place I could breathe when the rest of the world felt too sharp. Tonight it felt like a cage. I sat on the bed, my phone buzzing in my pocket, a family group chat notification. My stomach sank before I even opened it. "Pray for us," Linda had typed. "Our own daughter betrayed us. She stole from her family." My jaw dropped. Beneath it, replies were already piling up. "So sorry, Linda. You're so strong. Praying for you." And a few direct messages to me. "How could you, Marissa? If this is true, you've broken their hearts." It was like watching a courtroom verdict scroll across my phone, guilty, 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 without ever having a trial. I set the phone down like it was on fire. My mind was spinning, my pulse racing. 5 years. 5 years of overtime shifts, of quietly transferring money from my savings to their mortgage account, of giving up my own dream of buying a condo downtown just so they could keep this house, and they thought I'd steal from them? My throat burned. I wanted to march back downstairs, wave my bank statements in their faces, and scream the truth, but I could already hear their response. Excuses. Lies. I'd spent too many years swallowing my pride for the sake of peace. Tonight, that peace felt like poison. The house was too quiet. No TV murmuring from the den, no sound of Dad puttering in the garage. Just the faint hum of the furnace and the whisper of snow against the windows. I lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling. 48 hours. Where would I go? I had no plan, no packed bags, no backup apartment. I'd been here my whole life. First as their daughter, then as their unacknowledged safety net. Now I was disposable. Somewhere between the whir of the furnace and the ache in my chest, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. They didn't just want me out of the house. They wanted me out of the story of the house, out of the family, out of sight, out of mind. I think that's the moment something shifted in me. I didn't know how and I didn't know when, but I knew one thing. If they wanted me gone, they'd better be ready for what would come next. 5 years earlier, the air in this house felt different. Warmer, softer. Even with its creaky floors and leaky faucet, it was home. Back then, Dad still ran his small carpentry shop in town, and Mom kept busy with her book club and volunteering at the church thrift store. I was saving for my own place. Nothing fancy, just a little apartment above the bakery where the smell of fresh bread would greet me every morning. But that was before everything came apart. It happened slowly at first. One month when Dad's shop barely covered expenses. A winter when heating bills doubled. A new property tax that hit us harder than expected. Then came the year the snowstorm caved in the shop's roof. Insurance paid out just enough to repair the damage, but customers had already gone elsewhere. By the time spring rolled around, his business was a shadow of what it had been. I overheard their conversations from the hallway late at night. "We can't keep up with the mortgage, Tom," Mom would say, her voice tight with worry. "I'm doing everything I can," he'd answer, though even then I could hear the defeat in his tone. One night I heard the word foreclosure. It landed in my stomach like a stone. I remember standing outside their bedroom door, my back pressed against the wall, listening as they talked about cutting losses and maybe renting somewhere smaller. That's when I made my decision. The money I'd been tucking away each month for my own future, every tip from the diner, every holiday bonus, every dollar I could save by skipping dinners out. It would go to them instead. I didn't tell them, not because I wanted to be a martyr, but because I knew what they'd say. "We can't accept that, Marissa. We'll figure it out." Except they weren't figuring it out. And I couldn't stand the thought of driving past a for sale sign on the lawn where I'd grown up. So I called the bank. I set up automatic payments from my account straight to the mortgage. The first month, it hurt. Watching my savings account shrink felt like watching my own dreams drain away. But there was also a strange sense of purpose. I was doing something that mattered, something that kept us together. I told myself it would just be for a few months until they got back on their feet. But months turned into a year. A year turned into 3. And before I knew it, 5 years had passed. During those years, nothing between us really changed, at least not on the surface. Mom still commented on how I shouldn't stay single forever. Dad still grumbled when I left my shoes by the door. They didn't gush over my help or suddenly treat me like a hero, but that was fine. I wasn't doing it for praise. Still, there was a quiet ache that grew every time I heard them talking about our house, as if it had been solely theirs to protect, as if my name wasn't printed on every single payment confirmation for the last 60 months. The sacrifices piled up. I gave up the idea of moving out. I stopped talking about vacations because I couldn't afford even a weekend away. I worked extra shifts at the diner, sometimes coming home so tired my feet throbbed as I lay in bed. When friends asked why I was still living with my parents, I laughed it off. Oh, cheap rent, free meals. In reality, I was paying more for that roof over their heads than most of them paid for their own apartments. But I didn't tell anyone. The fewer people who knew, the safer it felt. There were moments when I almost slipped, like the day Mom scolded me for leaving a dish in the sink. "You live here for free, Marissa. The least you can do is keep the place tidy." The words stung, but I swallowed them. I didn't say, "I've been paying for this place longer than you think." I didn't pull out the receipts from my desk drawer. I just washed the dish and walked away. Or the time Dad grumbled about the cost of replacing the water heater, saying, "I guess we'll have to tighten our belts again." He didn't know I'd already moved money from my savings to cover it. It was easier to let them believe their version of reality. In those 5 years, I learned to live in the quiet spaces. I found little ways to make the house feel worth saving. Planting geraniums along the walkway in the spring, repainting the porch steps when the old paint started to peel, baking pies for Sunday dinners. I thought, foolishly, that maybe these small acts would add up to something they could see, that one day they might look at me and think, "She's been holding us together." But that day never came. Instead, the years of quiet giving only seemed to make my presence easier to overlook. I was the background character in their story. The one who lived upstairs, worked too much, didn't have a real career worth talking about at family gatherings. I told myself I could live with that. I told myself I didn't need their validation, until the night they accused me of stealing. Now, sitting in my bedroom with the snow drifting against the window and the clock ticking toward the moment I'd have to leave, I thought about all those years. The nights I'd stayed up late balancing my checkbook, making sure there was enough left over for groceries after the mortgage payment cleared. The birthday gifts I'd skipped buying for myself so I could cover an extra bill. The way I'd smiled when they talked about making it through the hard times, pretending I didn't know exactly how they had. 5 years of sacrifice, and they'd erased it in an instant. I got up and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was a neat stack of manila folders, my quiet insurance policy. Each folder held a year's worth of bank statements, printed payment confirmations, and correspondence with the mortgage company. I ran my fingers over the top sheet of the most recent folder. My name, my account number, the exact amount withdrawn each month. Proof. Proof that the house was still standing because I'd kept it that way. Proof that I hadn't just been living here. I'd been carrying it, and yet they saw me as a freeloader, a thief. I closed the drawer gently, almost ceremoniously. Not yet, I thought. They didn't deserve the truth, not in the heat of accusation, not when they'd already decided who I was. But the truth was mine, and when the time came, I'd use it. I didn't know then just how soon that time would come. The Sunday after they accused me, the house felt unusually crowded. I knew before I even reached the kitchen that extended family had arrived. I could hear the laughter from the living room, the sound of chairs scraping across the hardwood, the faint clink of wine glasses. Normally, on these days, I would keep my distance, help set the table, maybe sneak back upstairs before anyone noticed me. But that day, I lingered in the doorway, my hands gripping the frame, taking in the scene. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all gathered like it was a holiday, except it wasn't. Mom spotted me first. Her smile tightened, but she didn't stop talking. She was perched at the head of the table, looking every bit the gracious hostess, her ruby red sweater matching the lipstick she wore when she wanted to look put together. I started toward the kitchen to grab plates, but before I could, her voice carried across the room. "Marissa," she called, loud enough for every conversation to pause. "Can you try to move a little faster? You'd think after living here for free all these years, you'd at least know how to set the table properly." A ripple of awkwardness passed through the room. Someone coughed. A cousin shifted in his seat. I felt my grip on the stack of silverware tighten, the cold metal pressing into my palms. I swallowed whatever reply was fighting to get out and simply walked to the table. I took my usual spot at the far end, away from the laughter, the inside jokes, the warmth I used to belong to. Mom wasn't done. "So Marissa," she began, tapping her fork against her glass as if she were about to make a toast, "you're 34 now, right? Still no boyfriend? No real career worth talking about?" She laughed lightly, but it was a laugh meant to sting. I kept my eyes on my plate, chewing slowly, pretending the food didn't taste like dust in my mouth. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes glinting. "I just think some people are late bloomers. You'll get there eventually." My cheeks burned. No one defended me, not my father, who sat silent beside her staring at his plate. Not my cousins, who avoided my gaze. The thing about humiliation is that it's rarely loud. It's quiet, creeping under your skin, sinking into your bones until you feel smaller than the chair you're sitting in. After dinner, I gathered plates and carried them into the kitchen. I was halfway through rinsing them when I heard her voice again. Sharper now, edged with panic. "Where is it? Where is my necklace?" The sound of her heels against the hardwood was like gunfire. Dad appeared in the doorway, his face pale but tense. "Linda, calm down." "It's gone, Thomas. My ruby necklace is gone." I froze. My hands were still wet from the dishwater. She turned, eyes locking onto mine. "You," she hissed, like the word itself was poisonous. "You're the only one who'd take it. Always jealous. Always hanging around with nothing to show for yourself." My chest tightened. "I haven't touched your things," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Dad's eyes narrowed. "Is that true?" "Yes." I tried again, louder this time, but my words were drowned out by Mom's. "Don't you dare lie to me," she spat. "You've always needed money. God knows you'd pawn it in a second." Around us, the room went silent. My sisters-in-law busied themselves with stacking dishes they didn't need to stack. My cousins looked away. No one spoke. And in that moment, I realized they'd all made a choice. To believe her, not me. It wasn't about evidence. It wasn't about truth. It was about loyalty. And in this family, loyalty was blind. That night, after they left, I went upstairs and found my phone lighting up with notifications. The family group chat was buzzing. "Pray for us," Mom had written. "Our own daughter betrayed us and stole from her own family." I scrolled, each message hitting like a stone. So sorry, Linda. You're in our prayers. You're strong. You'll get through this. Then came the direct ones. How could you, Marissa? If it's true, you've broken their hearts. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Not one person had asked me if it was true. Not one had given me the benefit of the doubt. The realization settled heavy in my chest. 5 years of sacrifice meant nothing compared to one accusation. I closed the chat, but the words followed me into sleep. Though sleep was a generous term for the restless tossing and turning that passed for rest. When I woke the next morning, the light creeping in through the blinds felt almost cruel in its normalcy. I could hear the faint clatter of dishes downstairs, the sound of Mom moving about as though nothing had happened. But everything had happened. 2 days. That's all the time they'd given me to disappear from the house I'd kept afloat. I packed slowly, my hands moving on autopilot, sweaters into boxes, old photo albums between layers of clothes, not because I planned to take it all, but because I couldn't stand the thought of leaving my life here for them to throw away. Every corner of the room held a memory. The bookshelf where I'd hidden letters from my best friend in middle school. The window seat where I'd read books late into the night. 5 years ago, I'd thought saving this house meant saving us. Now I knew better. Late that night, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a private message from my Aunt Pauline. Your parents are planning to sell the house, she wrote. They're telling everyone you have no claim, that you're out for good. I thought you should know before you hear it from someone else. I stared at the words, my heart pounding in my ears. Sell the house. The house I had paid for, year after year without a single thank you. It was like watching the last thread tying me to them snap clean in half. When I finally looked up from my phone, the room seemed smaller. The air felt thinner. I realized, with a clarity that almost hurt, that I wasn't just being pushed out. I was being erased. And I had 2 choices. Let them, or fight back. That night, lying in bed, I pictured the folders in my desk drawer, the years of statements and receipts with my name printed in black ink. I thought about the conversations I'd overheard, the nights I'd stayed up past midnight balancing my checkbook, the birthdays I'd skipped celebrating to cover an extra bill. They could lie to the family, they could twist the story. But those papers? Those were mine. And they told the truth. I closed my eyes, my decision settling in my bones. I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. All right, I'll continue the story in the same tone and pacing, so it flows seamlessly. The day after Aunt Pauline's message, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest that no amount of coffee could lift. Snow was still falling outside, coating the street in a clean white layer, as if the world itself was trying to pretend nothing ugly had happened. But ugly had happened, and it was still happening. I couldn't stop replaying her words in my head. They're planning to sell the house. They're telling everyone you have no claim. They weren't just evicting me. They were cutting me out of the history of the house entirely, like I'd never been part of its survival. When I went downstairs that morning, Mom was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she stirred a pot of soup. The smell of carrots and celery filled the air, warm and deceptively comforting. She looked up when I entered, and for a split second, I thought she might say something, anything, to acknowledge the storm between us. Instead, she offered a clipped, "You're low on boxes. There's more in the garage." It wasn't a conversation. It was an order. I didn't bother responding. Back in my room, I sat on the bed, staring at the stack of half-packed boxes. Every item I placed inside felt like another piece of my life being stripped away. I'd lived here most of my life. I'd bled for this place in ways they would never know. And now, in less than 48 hours, I would be gone, while they smiled for real estate photos. That thought lit something inside me. If they were really selling the house, I needed to see it for myself. I needed proof. I opened my laptop and went straight to the local real estate listings. My fingers trembled as I typed in our address. It took less than a minute for it to appear. There it was, a glossy staged photo of my childhood home, its front porch freshly painted, the walkway lined with winter greenery. The caption read, "Beautifully maintained family home, lovingly cared for by longtime owners." I felt my stomach twist. Longtime owners, as if I had never existed. I clicked through the photos. My bedroom was spotless, stripped of the mismatched pillows and the stack of books I always kept on the nightstand. The kitchen gleamed under bright lighting. The worn cutting board Dad always used nowhere in sight. Even the living room, where I'd spent countless nights curled up with a blanket, looked like it had been scrubbed of all memory. It was like they'd erased me from every corner, every wall, every trace of who I was here. By the third photo, my hands were shaking. By the 10th, I could barely see through the sting in my eyes. This wasn't just a sale. This was a rewrite of history. I called Aunt Pauline. She picked up after 2 rings. "Marissa, I saw the listing," I said, my voice flat. "It's real." She hesitated. "I'm sorry, honey. I thought you knew. They've been talking about this for weeks. They told people you'd already moved on." Moved on. The words tasted bitter. They didn't even give me a chance to fight for it? She finished quietly. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she said, "Don't let them take everything from you. You've done too much for that place." I closed my eyes, her words solidifying into something sharper, heavier. I wouldn't let them. That afternoon, I pulled the manila folders from my desk. Every single one, spanning 5 years. Bank statements, payment confirmations, receipts, my name on every page. I spread them across my bed, each piece of paper a reminder of the nights I'd worked double shifts, the weekends I'd skipped seeing friends, the vacations I'd never taken. This was my history, my proof. But proof in a drawer wasn't enough. I needed something official. The next morning, I drove into town. The sky was overcast, the kind of heavy gray that made the mountains look darker than usual. My car heater wheezed in protest against the cold, but I kept the fan on high, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me steady. When I reached the county records office, the air inside was warm and dry, smelling faintly of old paper and lemon cleaner. A young clerk with kind eyes greeted me at the counter. "How can I help you?" she asked. "I need the payment history for a property," I said, sliding a scrap of paper with our address across the counter. She nodded and disappeared into a back room. When she returned, she was holding a slim file. "Here you go, 7 years of payment records." I opened it right there at the counter, and there it was. My name, printed neatly alongside line after line of payments, month after month, year after year. Seeing it on official letterhead hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just my memory or my private bank records anymore. This was documented, public record. With the file tucked under my arm, I stopped at a coffee shop downtown. The air smelled of espresso and cinnamon rolls, a welcome distraction from the icy wind outside. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for a free legal aid hotline. A calm female voice answered. I explained my situation, the payments, the eviction, the listing. She listened carefully, occasionally asking for dates or amounts. When I finished, she said, "If you can prove consistent payments over that length of time, you may have a legal claim to partial ownership under Colorado law." I gripped the phone tighter. "So I could fight this?" "You could," she confirmed, "and you'd have a strong case." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Finally, I whispered, "Thank you." When I hung up, my latte had gone cold, but I didn't care. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of power, the kind that comes from knowing you're not crazy, not powerless, not without options. I drove back to the house with the file and my folders, stacking everything neatly into a thick binder. As I slid the last page into a plastic sleeve, I realized this wasn't just paperwork. This was armor. They'd underestimated me for years. They'd thought I was the quiet one, the easy one, the one who would let them walk away with everything. But they were wrong. From that day forward, I stopped thinking of myself as someone they'd kicked out. I started thinking of myself as someone who was about to take a stand. They wanted me erased. They were about to learn how impossible that would be. The binder sat on my desk like a silent witness. 5 years' worth of sacrifice tucked neatly between plastic sleeves. Every page had my name on it. Every payment was proof that I wasn't just some freeloader who happened to be living under my parents' roof. But I knew better than to think that truth alone would be enough. In my family, the story wasn't what was true. It was what Mom told everyone was true. If I wanted to win this, I couldn't just have proof. I had to be ready to use it. That Monday morning, I made a list. Step 1. Organize every payment in chronological order. Step 2. Gather any text messages or emails that showed my parents asking for help. Step 3. Talk to someone who could explain exactly what my rights were, in plain English. I started with the payments. Sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor, I spread out all the bank statements from the manila folders. The papers fanned out around me like a white sea, each one marked with black lines where my account number had been, each one showing the exact amount I'd paid toward the mortgage. It was strange. I'd never looked at them all at once before. Seeing the total laid out like this made me realize just how much of my life I'd poured into this place. Around noon, I took a break and made a call to Aunt Pauline. She answered on the second ring. "I have the payment history," I told her. "That's good," she said, "but you'll need more than that. Can you show that they asked for your help?" I thought about it. Maybe. I have some old emails from Mom and a couple of texts from Dad about covering the bank drafts. "Find them," she said, "and make copies of everything. Don't just keep the originals." By late afternoon, I had a thick folder of printed messages. Every time they'd admitted the bills were too much, every time they'd thanked me for covering another month. Some of them were polite, almost formal. Others were raw. "If we can't make this month's payment, we're done." Looking at them now, I wondered if they'd even remember writing those words. The next morning, I drove into Denver to meet with a lawyer I'd found through the legal aid hotline. The office was small, tucked between a bakery and a dry cleaner, but inside, it was warm, with shelves lined in neat rows of legal books. The lawyer, a woman in her early 50s named Janet, listened as I laid everything out. I showed her the payment history, the emails, the bank statements. She flipped through them quietly, her brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, she set the binder down. "You have a solid claim," she said. "If you can prove you made these payments with the understanding that you were securing your place in the home, a court may award you a share of the equity." I leaned forward. "So I can stop the sale." She hesitated. "You might be able to file an injunction to pause it while the case is reviewed, but you'd have to move fast." Fast. That was a word I understood. She gave me a list of what else I'd need. Any witnesses who knew about my payments. Any written agreements, even informal ones. A timeline of when and why I made each payment. That night, I sat at my kitchen table. Not the one in my parents' house, but in the tiny apartment I'd rented for a few weeks while I sorted things out, and began writing my timeline. It read like a diary in numbers. March 2018. First payment, $1,150. After Mom's bakery closed. July 2019. Covered 2 months when Dad's hours were cut. December 2020. Paid full year's property tax to avoid foreclosure notice. August 2021. Covered 3 months while Mom was in the hospital. Every entry had a story behind it. Stories I'd kept to myself because I didn't want to make them feel guilty. By the time I was done, I had 22 entries, each one tied to a moment when I'd stepped in to save them. The irony wasn't lost on me. Those moments had been my way of showing love, and now they were my ammunition. The following weekend, I took another step, talking to the real estate agent handling the sale. I didn't confront her directly. I wasn't ready to tip my hand, but I made an appointment to tour the house as a potential buyer. She was polite, cheerful even, as she walked me through my home. She pointed out the fresh paint, the refinished floors, the open, airy kitchen. When we reached the living room, I stopped. "It's beautiful," I said. "I suppose the sellers are eager to close quickly." She smiled. "Yes, they've already had a few offers. They just want a smooth, clean sale." Smooth, clean. Like wiping my name off the history of the house. When I left, I called Janet. "They're close to accepting an offer," I said. "Then you need to be ready to file your claim," she replied. "If the sale goes through before you act, it gets much harder." The next day, I spent 6 hours scanning every document into digital form. I backed them up on a USB drive, a cloud folder, and even emailed them to myself. I wasn't going to give them the chance to make these papers disappear. By the end of the week, I had my binder, my timeline, my copies, my lawyer. And for the first time in months, I had something else too: control. They thought I'd leave quietly. They thought I'd let them sell my history, my sacrifices, my home. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not until they faced the truth I'd kept hidden for far too long. The day I decided to confront them, the air felt sharper, like the cold itself had teeth. Snow dusted the streets, each flake spinning in the wind before vanishing against the ground. I'd rehearsed this moment in my head for days. In the shower, on the drive to work, lying awake at 3 a.m. Every version ended the same way. I told them the truth and they finally saw me for who I was. But the truth has a way of playing differently, out loud. It was Saturday morning, the kind of morning when the house used to smell like pancakes and coffee, when we'd sit at the table in our pajamas, teasing each other about who'd eaten the most. Not today. Today, the air was brittle. When I walked in, Mom was at the counter, slicing apples into a bowl. Dad sat at the table reading the paper, his coffee steaming in front of him. Neither of them looked up right away. "Morning," I said, my voice steady. Mom's knife paused for half a second before continuing its rhythm. "You're early." I took a deep breath and set the thick binder on the table between us. "What's this?" Dad asked without looking up. 5 years, I said. 5 years of mortgage payments. My payments. That got his attention. He lowered the paper slowly, his brow creasing. Mom turned, a slice of apple still in her hand. "What are you talking about?" I opened the binder and slid it toward them. Inside, the pages gleamed under the kitchen light. Bank statements, payment confirmations, emails, and my neatly typed timeline. Dad flipped the first page. His eyes scanned the numbers, then flicked to my name printed on the transactions. "I've been paying for this house since 2018, I said quietly. "Every month, sometimes more than once a month. When you couldn't cover it, I did." Mom's jaw tightened. "That doesn't mean you own it." "It means," I said, keeping my voice calm, "that I've kept this house standing. That when the bank could have taken it, they didn't. Because of me." The silence stretched. Finally, Dad spoke. "Why are you bringing this up now?" "Because you're selling it," I said, meeting his eyes. "And you're telling everyone I have no claim. You're rewriting history like I was never part of it." Mom set the apple down a little too hard. "We didn't ask you to do this, Marissa. You chose to." I felt the words like a shove to the chest. "You didn't ask? You told me you couldn't make the payments. You told me if we missed another month, we'd lose the house, and I stepped in because I thought that's what family does." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "We never promised you anything." "That's the problem," I said. "You think because there wasn't a formal promise, it means it didn't matter. But it mattered to me. It cost me everything I'd saved. It cost me my independence, my 20s, my plans for the future." Dad looked away first. Mom just stood there. the slice of apple browning in her hand. "You've painted me as a freeloader, a thief," I continued, my voice shaking now. "You've told people I've been living here for free while you struggled, but that's not the truth, and you both know it." Mom finally tossed the apple into the sink and crossed her arms. "What do you want, Marissa? Money? A share of the sale?" "I want acknowledgement," I said. "I want the truth told. And yes, I want my share, the share I earned. You don't get to cut me out of something I helped save." Dad's voice was quiet but tense. "And if we refuse?" I met his gaze. "Then I take this binder to my lawyer. She's already told me I have a case, and I file an injunction to stop the sale." The words landed between us like a stone in still water. Mom blinked first. "You'd really drag your own parents into court?" I held her stare. I wouldn't have to if my parents hadn't decided I was disposable. For a long time, no one moved. The only sound was the clock ticking above the stove. Finally, Dad leaned back in his chair, exhaling heavily. "What exactly are you asking for?" 25% of the sale price," I said, "and my name cleared with the family. No more lies about what I've done here." Mom's mouth opened, but Dad raised a hand. "Linda, let me think." I stood there waiting. In the old days, I might have softened, offered to compromise, to back down. But those days were over. I'd built my case. I'd gathered my proof. And now, for the first time, I had the leverage to make them see me. When Dad finally spoke, his voice was low. "You'll have our answer tomorrow." I nodded once. "Tomorrow, then." And I left the binder on the table where they couldn't ignore it. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the ceiling, every muscle in my body tense. I didn't know what their answer would be, but I knew one thing for certain. They couldn't erase me anymore. The next morning felt like the longest morning of my life. I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting a message, half dreading it. Nothing. By 10 a.m., I'd paced my apartment enough to wear a faint trail in the rug. The winter lights slanted through the blinds, casting long stripes across the floor. I kept telling myself I wasn't going to go over there, that I would wait for them to call. At 10:17, I grabbed my coat and keys. The drive back to the house felt unreal, like I was heading towards something I couldn't stop even if I wanted to. The snow from the day before had turned to ice along the edges of the street. When I pulled into the driveway, Dad was already standing in the doorway. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just opened the door wider so I could step inside. Mom was at the table. The binder was in front of her, open to the first page. Her face gave nothing away. I sat down across from them. Dad spoke first. "We talked about it." I waited. "We're willing to give you the 25%, he said, "on one condition. We don't take this outside the family. No lawyers, no court." Mom shifted in her chair. "And we want it understood that you're doing this for financial reasons, not because you think we mistreated you." I stared at her. "Do you honestly believe I'd agree to erase what happened?" Her jaw tightened. I leaned forward. "Here's the thing. I'll take the percentage. But I'm also telling the family the truth. All of it. You can choose to stand there and deny it if you want, but I'm done keeping quiet." Dad rubbed a hand over his face. "Marissa." "No," I said, my voice steady. "You don't get to buy my silence. You get to buy my share of the house I saved. That's it." Mom's lips pressed together, but she didn't speak. Finally, Dad nodded slowly. "Fine." The conversation after that was short. We agreed that once the sale closed, my share would be wired to my account. I'd sign whatever was needed to finalize it, as long as the paperwork acknowledged my financial contributions. When it was done, I stood, slipping my gloves back on. As I reached the door, Dad said quietly, "You didn't have to fight like this, you know." I turned back. "You're wrong, I did, because no one else was going to fight for me." That afternoon, I called Aunt Pauline. When I told her the outcome, she let out a long breath. "Good for you," she said. You did what they never expected. You stood your ground. A week later, the family gathered for Sunday lunch at Aunt Gloria's. I didn't want to go, but I also knew it was time. The room quieted when I walked in. Eyes followed me as I made my way to the table. I stood at the head of it, my hands resting on the back of an empty chair. "I want to say something," I began. 5 years ago, this family's house was weeks away from foreclosure. I stepped in. I paid the mortgage month after month, year after year, because I believed we were in it together. Recently, my parents decided to sell without acknowledging my part. That's their choice. But I won't let anyone think I didn't contribute. I did, and I have the proof. A few people exchanged glances. Others looked down at their plates. "That's all," I said. "Enjoy lunch." And I took my seat. No one said much to me during the meal, but I didn't care. The silence wasn't the same as before. This time, it wasn't shame. It was space. And I could live with that. The sale closed 3 weeks later. The day the money hit my account, I transferred most of it into a savings account and used a small portion for something I dreamed about for years, a solo trip to the coast. I rented a little cottage by the ocean where the air smelled of salt and the mornings began with the sound of waves instead of the creak of my parents' kitchen floor. One evening, I sat on the porch with a mug of tea, watching the horizon melt into shades of gold and pink. For the first time in a long while, I felt still. I thought about the house, about all the nights I'd sat up counting pennies, all the years I'd told myself that sacrifice was just what love looked like. Now I knew better. Love wasn't about letting people take from you until there was nothing left. Real love, the kind worth holding on to, was the kind that respected you enough to stand beside you, not above you. I took a deep breath of the salty air and smiled to myself. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined 5 years ago. It was better, because it was mine. In the end, I learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. 5 years of sacrifice deserved more than silence, and the truth deserved to be told. If you've ever felt erased or overlooked, remember this: your worth isn't defined by who acknowledges it. It's defined by the courage you show in protecting it. You don't need permission to defend what's yours. And real love, the kind that lasts, never asks you to disappear to keep the peace. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And always remember, you matter, and your love leaves a mark.